Holy cow. All right, what a way to start. Okay. Let me get back on here, everybody. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Studio HFL, where my guest this evening is Chuck Wilson, who has a very unique connection with the iconic Empire Brass Quintet. And before we get to Chuck, I'd like to thank the show sponsors, including my gold level sponsor, Messina Covers, Carl Hama Design, Piggott Blackburn, S.E. Shires, the Eastman Music Company, Chop Saver, and Austin Custom Brass. Don't forget, you can follow me on social media and sign up for the newsletter at studioHFL.com. And of course, you can sponsor the show financially by visiting patreon.com/studioHFL. Now, previously on the show, I have interviewed Jeffrey Curnow, Mark Reese, and Scott Hartman, all having significant roles with the Empire Brass. But now we're going to hear from a tour manager for the group. Please help me welcome Chuck Wilson. I'm going to bring Chuck on here just a second. Boy, I need somebody helping with I need a producer. That's what I need. Here we go. Look at that. That's it. I need a producer. That's what I need. Somebody to actually push the buttons in the background. Hey, Chuck, welcome.
Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you.
How do you like that flawless introduction?
That's nice.
Yeah,
No
well, yeah. So, you know, we connected, I don't know, maybe a few months back, where you had actually reached out. You had, I guess, gotten to listen to one of the previous interviews, and remind me which one that was.
Jeff Curnow.
And I've been able to interview him twice. One, the second one was specifically about Empire. And that was great. But what a fun person to talk to. And, you know, he's the one who designed the Studio HFL logo.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You know, since I knew he was a cartoonist, I said, hey, man, would you mind? And, well, he didn't do it for free, but I was glad to hire him to do that. It was great. So
Yes.
let's start with, we're going to talk about Empire, but also finding out that you've got a military background. You've got a drum corps background, which we will certainly hold against you.
I'm sure. Most people do.
Yeah. But you say, let's see, you're on the East Coast right now. What'd you say? Tell me, Westminster, Maryland?
Correct. Westminster, Maryland.
And are you an East Coast person your whole life? Are you originally from there?
I'm originally from Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Oh. I'm trying to think what's there. Oh, chocolate. That's what's there.
Chocolate. Yes, and a drum corps called the Hershey Chocolatiers.
Oh, you're kidding.
I'm not kidding. And I played with them for 2 years.
I was going to say, it's a, well, I guess it's a PG show. I was going to say it's an all-male corps, right? Because there's just a bunch of nuts, right? So, and moving on. All right, so I get my first PG-13 rating on that one. So, you know, of course, the real interest to me, of course, originally was being able to talk to somebody who had been on the road with Empire Brass. But there's a lot more to you than just that. So let's start with, you know, you've got a musical background. Let's start with, you know, are you a trumpet player? When did you start playing? Was it part of community service? Was it something you wanted to do?
Everybody in our family played music. My parents both had 3 sisters and a brother, all older than me, who were all very good musicians through high school. And my dad just loved music. He loved Stan Kenton, big bands like that. So I started trumpet in 5th grade, and as I got along towards the end of high school, there was some question as to what I was going to do. And he was pretty much the one that pushed me to Westchester State College down near Philadelphia, which was a good music ed school. They were strong in music ed, phys ed. And that's what we did. So I went to Westchester and got a BS in music ed. They're just strong across the board in education. They had a huge marching band. They had symphony. There were probably 50 trumpet players there. It was very competitive. And by the time I was a senior, I made it to the top. in the orchestra and so forth. So, but it took a while because there were guys a year ahead of me going on to Juilliard and New England Conservatory
Wow.
on trumpet. So it was very competitive
Who
in a
was
small
teaching out
school.
there?
His name is Ken Laudermilk,
Still there?
and no, he's retired. I've seen him recently, and uh, he was there for many years. Played a lot of extra with Frank Catarabic in the Philly Orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
and he also played down in Delaware in the Wilmington
Mm-hmm.
Orchestra. He was very symphonically oriented, you could say.
Was he the draw for that school? Is that why there were so many trumpet players out there?
I would say to some degree. I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ed program was very strong there. It's a teachers' college. It used to be
Ah,
Westchester Teachers College,
gotcha.
Towson has a school like that, which was called Towson State
Mm-hmm.
in Maryland and so forth. So
Well, now Westchester rings a bell. That was it the Crossmen that were from Westchester, or am I thinking of a
yes,
different? It was
that's
Pennsylvania.
correct.
Okay.
They were, yeah. Well, they were from right around Delaware in southeast PA. They're out of Texas nowadays, but they were
Right.
formed in Westchester, and there were a lot of Westchester guys in that corps,
Mm-hmm.
tons of them. And the band was half seemed to be half Crossmen. So I never played with those guys. I always played in seniors, which is a different bracket, but
Mm-hmm.
I still love the Crossmen.
Yeah, like
So
I'm thinking there's a lot of well, there were so many corps back in the day, but Reading was it Buccaneers?
yes,
That was a senior
Buccaneers, they're
corps.
still going strong. Yeah, if you weren't at Westchester, in other words, if you weren't in the Crossmen, you were probably in the Bucks. That's just the way it was. It was seniors and juniors, but
Yeah.
it's a different dynamic, which is a long story. But that's correct.
When I first got into drum corps, early '80s, I couldn't remember how many junior corps there were, and the senior corps.
Mm,
I mean, there were more than you could swing a cat at, but um, it's those were the days certainly. And well, I'm sure I'm even the
oh yeah.
60s, 70s. People would argue that those were the days for drum corps. But I remember seeing some senior corps back in the day, and holy cow, you guys had fun.
That was a blast. Once you went to a show, back when those horns were still one valve with a rotor valve,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of mystique to those horns, and they're pitched into the key of G. Um, and you got to look at those horns, and when you were like in eighth grade, you just couldn't wait to get your hands on them and play. There
Hmm.
was a group called the Hawthorne Capillaries. They're still around, and they make the hair stand up in the back of your neck. They're just incredible. So
Muchachos,
that's
yeah, I'm
kind of
remembering.
what's yeah,
Hmm.
yes. I saw them in Hershey one time.
Hmm.
Fabulous drum corps. So that's
There's
kind of
something to be.
where it started for me because
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think it's Arnold Jacobs said that it may have been one of your someone quoted him on one of your podcasts that whatever you started with in music is what stays with you the longest. And this all started with me in Hershey, where these corps would come to town for a show, and we had a lot of fields around the schools,
Hmm.
and each one of these would be at a different school, and I'd ride on my bicycle and go to each one, just ride around town and see these corps when I was really young,
Hmm.
in junior high school, and here I am still doing it. Age 60, what am I, 63? So I just played Saturday night with one, so go
Well,
figure.
yeah. Well, we
Yeah,
were
go
talking
figure.
before we started about you can't get it out of your system once you've been bitten by that drum corps bug. It's hard to be cured, and you don't want to be cured, right?
That's true. It's
Yeah.
a lot of fun. So what can I
Um,
say? And then that's it. When I saw the opening, we'll probably get to this, but when I joined the Hellcats in the West Point band, primarily a bugle job, and I was just a marching bugle type guy, and that certainly helped to get the job.
hmm.
So
I don't think there is a louder, more powerful instrument than the G bugle. And I appreciate that chords
It
have
is.
moved to B flat instruments. I will say the intonation is better, but
Oh, those ones are
just
terrible. But they even the best one is terrible. I have one downstairs. Cancel. I hate to say that,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's I don't think it's easy to make that horn. But um, but you're right. It's got a certain sizzle point up in the upper register. When you get up to about a high G and a high A, it just rocks. And
yeah,
so um, and it's fun to play in that register,
yeah,
especially when you're backed up with a big section behind you. So
right.
yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh. So yeah, I was with Star of Indiana, 85, 86, and 87, the very first 3 years of Star. And a
Wow.
lot of my
Yeah.
friends are still, of course, that Star, that group. I think 93 was the last competitive year. 94. I should know this. I can't believe
Okay.
but Star United is the. I guess they're still called the Senior Corps. Is uh, the group that exists
I'm not
now,
sure.
and some of my friends are still part of that, and I'm hoping to actually get a chance to be to perform with them at some point, but it just hasn't worked
Good.
out yet.
Okay.
Um,
That's awesome.
so, which came first? Was it the bugle or the trumpet
Trumpet.
for you?
Yeah, trumpet. Grade 5 through 12. I didn't pick up a bugle till I was a junior in college because my mother wouldn't let me join a drum corps. I found out later that she played in the junior corps when she was a kid.
So she knew. She knew.
Well, they rehearse and then they all go to the Legion and I got the speech many times. Um, that summer after I think my sophomore year in college, I joined the local corps. I played there 2 years, and then when I finished college, I was off to Boston, so that was over.
What was the draw over to Boston?
Well, when I finished college, my teacher was pointing me to Boston to the New England Conservatory or to Boston U, and
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up at the U in the master's program.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Empire was there as a quintet in residence,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how I met them. So,
What year would that have been?
well, I started there fall of '80. Okay, fall of '80.
Yep.
My master's program was it ended up being 3 semesters: fall, spring, 80, 81,
Mm-hmm.
and then fall of '81.
Mm-hmm.
The fall of '81 was the year the Empire broke out full time. Okay, so when I was there in my first year, Rolf and David were still in the orchestra for that whole season.
Mm-hmm. And did you get to play in that orchestra with them?
In at BU,
Oh no, you're talking about Tanglewood.
are you
Sorry.
asking? Oh no, I'm talking about school, at Boston University in the city,
Gotcha.
not at
Gotcha.
Tanglewood. Okay,
Okay.
so I was just in the master's program there. I was studying with Roger Balzan
Mm-hmm.
that first year there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it
You've
started there. But
you've got quite the
mhm.
pedigree.
Well, it's funny what happened because I think some of my problems cropped up, and because of that, things happened. And what I'm saying is, when when I was studying with Roger, he was not a technician whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
We worked on a repertoire and so forth, and I had some physical problems playing the trumpet. And leading into the second semester in the spring, a buddy of mine, Pete Madsen, suggested we get a quintet going because you could take quintet for credit,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time you can pick out your coach. And Pete knew that Charlie Lewis of Empire was probably the best coach around, and
Mm-hmm.
that proved to be true. And so he was our coach in the spring. And when we would rehearse the quintet, and he would come to the rehearsals, he'd give me that look at my child, and then he'd start giving me tips and things, and he could see I had a few problems here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, I got to the end of the spring semester, and I had probably the worst recital you could ever imagine. And it was a pretty embarrassing night, but I got through it. My family had to live through that, and Roger Wazam was there and all this. And uh, the next day, I called up Charlie and I told him what happened, and he listened to me for a couple minutes. He goes, "Okay, in September, come over with me." And so that's what we did. In the next September, I had one semester to go, and he was my teacher, and that was right when the quintet broke out in full
Mm-hmm.
time status.
Mm-hmm.
And he took me back to page 13 of the Arvin's book with a metronome and showed me how to play the trumpet. And that semester went really well. I played a good recital, and he had everything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Charles Lewis. He's a some people call him the doctor, and he's definitely the doctor of chops up there.
Was a well? I guess the recital itself was a humbling experience, but with him taking you back to the beginning of the Arbans, did that feel like torture,
Yeah,
or did you appreciate at the time what was happening?
I think what I said to him is, my friend Pete, the guy I was in the quintet with, he also quit Roger Voisin. You can imagine this,
Mm.
and studied with Charlie that semester too. And I asked him what he was working on, and he wasn't doing any of that stuff. And I said to Charlie, Pete's not doing. He's not on page 13 of the Arvin's book. And he goes, Pete doesn't need that, man. You need it. He was very individualistic. He knew what each player
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah.
So because he had been down that road himself. He had a midlife crisis on the trumpet, brought himself
Mm-hmm.
back with the stamp material,
Mm-hmm.
and he went out and studied with stamp and with Arnold Jacobs. And he really came back tough, but he knew how to straighten people out. That is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to know him really well, and my my degree was over in December, and he called me right after that and asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to line up for some teaching interviews. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, well, the guy who's on the road with us quit, and we need somebody on the road, and that's how it started.
Mm-hmm.
So
Were
kind of crazy.
Were you able to take your horn with you while you were out there on the road, or were you focused
Did
completely
initially,
on?
but I did initially, but I found out rather quickly that that wasn't part of the job. I didn't have time for it. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to, I wasn't going to be playing anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I didn't, believe it or not, I didn't care. I had taken a lot of summers off, and this
Mm-hmm.
is probably the reason I'm not in the New York Philharmonic. Because growing up, I would take complete summers off working on the farm and
Mm-hmm.
just pick it up a week before going back to college and stuff like that. Before I played trump corps, and
Mm-hmm.
I was used to taking time off, and so I did take a horn out on the road the first time we went, but shortly after that, I realized there was no point in that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that didn't bother me whatsoever. It wasn't really part of the job, of course.
So, what was part of the job? Was it explained to you, or was it uh,
The
trial
way
by
it worked was
fire?
he called me up and he said, what are you doing? Do you want to go out on the road? And I said, yeah. He says, come on down tomorrow. We're having a rehearsal. We'll walk you through it a little bit. So I
Mm-hmm.
go down. I meet Rolf for the first time down on Marlborough Street, which is where he had an apartment building, beautiful building. He lived on the top floor, rented the other apartments, and Empire had their office in one of two, basically, what are apartments on the
Mm-hmm.
main floor, ground floor, and then he had the basement, essentially an apartment, but all the quintet stuff was down in what would be the living room of this apartment.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a bedroom and bathroom. At the time, Palafian was living in there, and so I came down to the rehearsal space, very small. We're in there, and Rolf talks me through the job for about 10, 15 minutes. Dave said a few things, and it's okay. Give us a call after New Year's. January 2nd, call in. We'll figure out what's going on for the January tour. I called Rolf on about January 2nd, and he tells me, well, it's going to change. We're going to take another guy. And it ended up being a friend of his that he grew up with, Bruce
Mm-hmm.
Heineman. And I guess they went out on the road. They were all over the place on the West Coast and had a lot of breakdowns. This and that happened, and pretty soon when they got back to town, that was it for that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd been starting to work some small jobs and this and that. And about 6 weeks later, Charlie called me back and he goes, "Okay, we're going to take you this time." So I came back to Boston. I went down to my parents in Hershey,
Mm-hmm.
and so I came back to Boston. I had one day of office training with the girl who was working in the office, and the next night we went up to Keene State College in New Hampshire for a run out in cars. Basically, all I was going to do then was sell some records,
Mm-hmm.
just go with the group up there and so forth. And then the following day, we took off on the road for about a 3 week tour of the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, what that involved was just driving the truck, selling the records, helping them any way we could. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we sort of invented it as we went. But it's like a sixth man. They needed extra hands on a lot of things, and my job was just to help them in any way I could to make them have an easier time to perform.
Mm-hmm. Who was in the group at that time?
So it would have been the four originals. That would be Rolf, Charlie, Lewis, Dave O'Hanian, Sam Palafian, and at that time it was Mark Lawrence on trombone.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Lawrence came for 1 year on a sabbatical from the San Francisco Symphony,
Mm-hmm.
and because Norman, I guess there have been several trombone players in and out at that time, but Norman Bolter remained in the symphony orchestra. He didn't quit to go full time, and on the first year in the road, it was Mark Lawrence, wonderful trombone player.
Mm-hmm.
So we took off, and the whole gist of this thing is how to get along with Rolf because he really runs the show, you know, and there's a lot of mystique surrounding him, but it took about a week, and he and I started clicking pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were two reasons that it started to work pretty well. One was that I had driven a lot of trucks, work farms, and I think one of their problems was that whoever was driving before couldn't quite get that thing into a loading dock, back then without a lot of help and
Mm-hmm.
pumping into stuff. I don't know, but I could take a truck and back it in a loading dock. I didn't need any help, and they recognized that right away. And Charlie told me that because once you got behind the wheel, things would be smoother.
Mm-hmm.
And we were around the East Coast. I was real familiar with the geography and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is that they figured out a way to sell a lot more records than they had been selling, which is kind of a funny story. But once some of that stuff got smoothed out, Rolf and I really started getting along, and that was the key to it, really.
Well, what was the secret to selling more records?
Records. They had a lot of albums at that time, 10 or 12 maybe.
Mm.
Close to a dozen albums.
Mm-hmm.
There was the Ewald Quintet album, American Brass Band, what they called the Revisited album, the Baroque
Mm-hmm.
Brass. That's a well-known album. They had, and those were on what we called a budget line. They were $6 records. Okay, when we sold them. Then they had two on CBS. They just recorded the music from the Broadway show Annie,
Mm-hmm.
and they had their original American Brass Band record, which was had been around a few years there. Those sold for $10, and then they had five of them that were digitally recorded. Those were $12. Okay, that was
Mm-hmm.
Bernstein, West Side Story, and some others.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem at the concert was that you only have 10 or 15 minutes to sell records, and the only question I was getting from all the people was, why are these $6? Why are those 12? And these are 10.
Mm.
And it got through the whole procedure, and I'm like, why should I pay 6 or 12 for that? And I could get two of these $6 records. And we weren't selling that many records, and it didn't take me very long
Mm-hmm.
to figure out. And I did it without asking them. Like, let's just sell them all for $10.
There you go.
Okay, I'm gonna lose 2 on all the digitals. So I'm gonna make 4 more on the budgets, and it also eliminated the $1 bills. So now all the records $10, right? All records $10, and now we're dealing 10s, 20s, and 50s, and now we're selling some records. It just kind of worked like that, and he loved that. In fact, we got I don't know if it was that tour or the next tour, he started looking in the back of the truck. He's like, Chuck, man, we're running out of records. And that was a great problem. It's great to teach me how it is we restock records and all that. And we also carried sheet music and T-shirts and all that other stuff. So there was
Mm-hmm.
all that to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the record sales, he liked that a lot.
So, were you in charge of keeping that inventory?
Once I learned how to do it, yes, yeah. Now we had
Mm-hmm.
mail order too, so we had leaflets that we would pass out, and people would grab those leaflets like crazy. It had all the records on tapes on there, um,
Mm-hmm.
prices, and we had mail order, and it would get mailed right to 406 Marlborough Street, where the office was. And later on we moved the office up to Boston University in terms of administration, but all that stuff, records, tapes, T-shirts, and all that stuff stayed down at Marlborough Street. So I'd be up at the office for
Mm-hmm.
8, 10 hours, come home, and then I'd sit there and fill out mail order records, and get them ready and ship them UPS. And there was a lot to it. But
So, there's a generation that doesn't appreciate the please mail your check or money order to. And then it was 6 to 8 weeks for delivery, right? I mean, it was 2 months or more before you would ever see.
yeah,
I mean, there was
that's right.
Amazon, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
night and day.
I mean, consider Robert King music, and I don't know if do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Robert,
Mm-hmm.
the Robert King catalog you mailed away, and you waited at home to receive the music.
Yep.
Uh, it's kind of interesting, really. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's gone nowadays. But
Yeah.
they
Well,
did
thank
sell
goodness.
they did sell the whole music library. That they had something called the manuscript series,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 15, 18 titles that they had published, including Ewald's second and third quintets. And at some point while I was there, we sold that whole thing to G. Shermer,
Hmm.
which really took a load off our minds because they were always wanting me to go in towns and try and sell all this music. I think there was not a lot of time to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about one music store at a time. So G.
Mm-hmm.
Shermer really helped. I don't know what they got for that catalog, but they got it out the door and they got them into an international sized publisher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
What when you were on tour? What was the length back then? Would you go out for 6 weeks, 2 months, or a week at a time?
I'm gonna say 3 weeks, 2.5, 3.5 weeks, something in
Mm-hmm.
there. The West Coast trips were a little bit longer, you know, but
Mm-hmm.
I got there in that spring. Did the East Coast tour. Then we went to the Trumpet Guild conference at Kentucky. I'm changing the subject on you for a second, but we after we got off the first tour, Rolf's like, "Okay, what are you going to do? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to keep going." And he said, "Well, nobody wants to take the stuff down to the Trumpet Guild conference. Do you want to go?" Of course, I want to go. So I flew down there with all their stuff, um, and we had a display for the week, and they played a
Mm-hmm.
concert. It was incredible. And while we were down there, when the concert was over, I guess we went out partying, and Rolf said, "Okay, now what?" And he goes, "Why don't you come to Tanglewood for the summer with us to the program that they have, the 8 week seminar?" Um, and I did, and so and then we just went to the next season, right into
Mm-hmm.
September and on tour. So I think that first tour was in the fall of '82. Was around the Midwest. We
Mm-hmm.
came back to town, and then at some point, I drove the truck all the way to L.A. or San Diego, picked them up. We
Mm-hmm.
did a big West Coast swing, ending in Seattle, I do believe, and that was a pretty long trip. Of course, then I had to take the truck to wherever the next one was starting, which I might drive it to Denver and park it, fly home for 3 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever, come back and get it, and head to the next start.
Were you ever the one in contact with the presenter, or was that always Rolf that would meet with those
That was
people?
my job to call them every day. So
Mm-hmm.
wherever we're playing, get in town, call, establish contact. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times they had a party afterwards, and we needed to know about that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, directions to the job, things of that nature. So, but
You know,
those
these
jobs were
days.
all they were all set. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, Columbia artists, they set all those tours up. So they
Hmm.
would just hand us all the sheets, and these are the contacts. So we didn't book those tours, but they did. And then when we got into each town, we would get in touch with the sponsors and go
Hmm.
from there.
That actually answered my question because these days they have showcases. There's Arts Midwest and some other showcases where groups
Mm-hmm.
actually pay to go and do a 15-minute showcase, and hopefully you're going to
Right.
get booked for the next season. But it sounds like, of course, they didn't have to do that.
Yeah, Columbia, they booked probably 95% of their concerts.
Hmm.
They did their own bookings. Empire did in Boston and around the metro area, but for the most part, it was Columbia.
Do you recall what kind of money? I mean, if you're even able to divulge that, do you recall what kind of money was involved in that in a show back then?
Uh, but this Columbia artist community concert series, some of those were pretty low. Um, it could be like $2,500, 3,500.
Hmm.
Um, when, but we're talking a long time ago.
Hmm.
Um, when they sold other jobs, they used to call it a straight sale, where they just book a single concert with somebody. Those brought more money. They might be say $5,000.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, at that time the Canadians were making probably a good bit more money than Empire, but Empire was
Hmm.
just getting on a full time scale,
Hmm.
and I wasn't making hardly any money. But I had no expenses. I lived for free at Rolf's, and yeah, I probably didn't even care at that point. And when they toured Japan and Europe and so forth, I didn't go, and I understood that because I wrote the checks. I was a check signer and
Hmm.
kept the books for both the publishing company and for Empire, and I knew what the cash flow was like. And
Hmm.
those guys, and the two of them had just quit the Boston Symphony, so that was a major change financially for them.
Right.
So they were reaching for every dollar they could get out of the company,
Hmm.
out of
Hmm.
Empire. So I don't know if you know this, but Empire was a nonprofit corporation. Probably still is.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, they were nonprofit. There's about 10 categories of nonprofits, such as hospitals, educational organizations, and whatnot, and they fit under the educational headline there. So
Hmm.
they had that status, which that helped them get started, I think.
Well, in humor, most people would argue that brass quintets are all non-profit,
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
Yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
few there. I think the Canadians are making pretty good money.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
but
and
yeah,
jumping ahead a little bit though, if you look at the group now, Chuck Dallenbach is the only one from that early group that's still there. But boy, are they still entertaining.
yeah.
They still do a great
I
job.
haven't
Did
seen
you?
them since Jens was there, but
Oh, that's
so it's
been a
been quite a
long
while.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Uh, did you guys ever cross paths on the tour? I mean, I know you wouldn't be performing
I
in the
don't
same
think
place the
so.
same
That's a good
night.
question too,
No.
man.
Hmm.
I don't think we were in a town that they were in within a couple days or a week of
Hmm.
each other or something like that. Let's put it this way: we were in a town that they had played in during the same season at least, and
Hmm.
the reviewer wrote an interesting comparison between the two bands, and it's you can imagine what it was. One's more serious in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
different kind of sound. Empire was all about sound. Um, Canadians were just a big feature, you know, great players, but they're a little bit different kind of product. So
Hmm. Hmm.
you know,
Well, and thank
um,
goodness for both. I mean,
sure,
truly.
yeah, they had to
I
be
mean,
different.
but I can't imagine not just the brass quintet world, but I can't imagine the musical world without either of those groups having been around. I mean, both of them
Hmm.
have contributed so much uh,
Yeah.
to the
And there's Dave
repertoire.
O'Hannon who played in both of them.
Hmm. Hmm.
David left when he left. He said, "I'm going to the Canadians." This is after I his big one of his big reasons was there was no teaching. Empire taught like crazy. And they taught the summer seminar for
Mm-hmm.
8 weeks, the BU for
Mm-hmm.
2 semesters a year, but
Mm-hmm.
individually and as a quintet, and teaching, teaching, teaching. And Dave
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, because he was really good on the road. He could be on the road all the time. He exercised. He just cool as a clam on the road. It
Mm-hmm.
fit him really well. See, I don't think the road ever
Mm-hmm.
bothered him. It's just he was tired of the teaching. He made more money
Mm-hmm.
than Canadian Brass. He probably had about 20 years in each group. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great guy.
Okay, so there's an interesting perspective. I mean, you saw each of these guys. Of course, there's the dynamic between them and Rolf and them and each other. But what
Mm-hmm.
maybe something unique about each of those? What was their thing? Sam, was he into
Yeah.
Tai Chi? I mean, I don't know. I doubt that that's but uh, uh, what did they do
Yeah, it's a
to relax or divert their attention?
when the group was off, they didn't hang out a whole lot together. Sometimes, though. Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, when I started, he was living in a tiny apartment down the basement of Marlborough Street, and then his wife came up, Diane. I think she was playing in New York. She's a violinist, I believe, and they moved
Mm-hmm.
over right a couple blocks from the School of Music at BU into a nice apartment, and he was into health food, and he was done drinking pretty much, and whatever else he might have done over the years, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. He was really into the health scene, and it just it was just a tuba monster. And he was always down. If he was he was down in a practice room where he had his studio and BU, and it's about 10 by 10. It's a tiny room. You could always find him there. Um, he really knew how to travel too. He knew how to get in
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. He had been everywhere. The guy had
Mm-hmm.
so much experience at age whatever he was, 32. It was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Dave O'Hanian was such a natural at the French horn. He often said, you know, I, he was thankful he didn't have a lot of physical problems or any, and he could concentrate on learning music and have and musicianship.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was on the road, he was just the most relaxed guy,
Mm-hmm.
and yet one of the great players.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Lewis, he was a night owl. He didn't like when we had things going on at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, which happened once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, Sam said, Charlie, he eats a meal that nobody else has in their routine, and it occurs around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So I found it, especially when we were in the South, he'd come and get me and say, "Come on, we're going to Waffle House. It'd be 1 o'clock in the morning. We eat big breakfast and all that." And I think they were trying to get away from each other a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
when they could.
Mm-hmm.
They spent so much time together. And Rolf was just so wired up all the time. I was telling Jeff when I sent him that email that when I started there, they were building Wendy's restaurants at every intersection across the country, and we pull in there every day for lunch. And Rolf would go into Wendy's and eat lunch and never sit down. He'd be standing, he'd be walking around eating his burgers. He couldn't sit down. It's just mind is going like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Always thinking about music.
oh yeah. What are we going to do next? All the time.
Mm-hmm.
The wheels
Mm-hmm.
were turning. And Mark Lawrence was the trombone player initially. And then he went back to San Francisco, and Larry Isaacson took his place. Larry had taken Mark's place in San Francisco Symphony on that
Mm-hmm.
sabbatical, and they flip flop.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry was pretty young, and he uh, he had a hell of a sound. He was a great player. I think he stayed in Boston after he left the crew. So you get all these different personalities, and But when the horns came up, it was that's something David said when Rolf passed away. He said we had our differences, but when we brought the horns up, all was forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great line. It was very true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Um, of course, the interaction between uh, members, and I think between Rolf and Eric Ruskey, might be some of the most famous. But and again, I'm not asking to give away too much, but were you ever witness to any of these outbursts?
I don't know what happened between him and Eric. I did meet Eric one time,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we had a few of those.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. I'll tell you a couple things that happened. We did a run out concert to Juilliard from Tanglewood, and we were late. And of course, it was my fault. Um, I think they were playing an afternoon concert there. I think it was 2 o'clock. That thing was going to go off, and yeah, on a weekend, like a Saturday afternoon. And we got to the stage door at 2:15.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are in Manhattan. We came through the tunnel, Lincoln Tunnel. These guys are warming up in the truck, trying to get changed. They know they're late, and Rolf was going, "This is my first time playing at Juilliard. We're late." It's on, and we're gonna dock Chuck because and man, for about 3 days, that was a
Mm-hmm.
factor. But he forgave me eventually, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you got on the wrong side of him, you were done.
Mm-hmm.
He just he was tough, but he was because of the caliber of player he was, and the way the group evolved around him. He could prove it. He could hold his weight.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know.
After
So
Larry Isaacson had come back in, were you? How much longer were you there? Did you see other people come in and out of the group?
no, that was it. Would have been about a year and a half with Larry, I think,
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
like that. In fact, Rolf and I had a big fight. We smoothed it out later, but when I got to a certain point where I wasn't sure if I was ever going to play the trumpet again. I started thinking about that,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw that ad for the West Point band, and I showed it to my dad, and my dad is like, "This is what you should be doing," because he couldn't believe I was even doing this job. When I came back for a second year around with Empire, he was like, "Are you
Mm-hmm.
kidding me? You're going to do that again?" And I said, "Yes." And if I hadn't gotten the job with the band, I probably would have kept going.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw this listing. I started looking into it a little bit, and the way the audition process worked at the West Point band was they didn't bring in 50 guys to play against each other.
Mm-hmm.
They brought them down there one at a time. And they wanted you to go get a physical for the Army first
Mm-hmm.
and take a test, like a little Army SAT test, and get through that before you would ever come down and play,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of goofy, but they wanted to make sure you were enlistable before you came in. So I went through that process without telling them. Okay, then I had to
Mm-hmm.
get in shape for the audition. Now, at the same time, we were out on the West Coast, and they flew home from I think Seattle, and I was driving. I was driving to Denver. I was going to park the truck and fly home, and I had a ticket on a given day. And when I started driving from Seattle, I started to think, if I just drive all night, I could probably make it a day ahead of time, get home, take a day off, and rest.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted to do, and I did that. I probably had 1 hour sleep, so however many miles that is. Get to Denver, parked the truck, got on the plane a whole day early, went home. Now I'm sleeping. And somehow that day, Rolf called down there, and I must have picked up the phone. And he found out I was home already. He thought I was coming home the next day. He wanted to know why I wasn't at the office, and I was exhausted. And I told him that, and he was going on and on about me. And right then, I just I flipped my lid, and I told him, "Look, I can't do this anymore. It's exhausting. I'm not making enough money. Blah blah blah. I was yelling at him, and uh, and all of a sudden he backed way off.
Mm.
So, and he goes, come on up to BU this afternoon, about 5 o'clock after our rehearsal. We'll start talking
Mm-hmm.
through it. And so I came up there, and um, we kind of smoothed it over. But eventually, what I told them was, I'm trying to get this job in the band,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what happened. But it took several months. I stayed there another 4 or 5 months after we had this blow up. But he forgave me almost instantly. He just really on my side. He just If I had told him that I wanted to take a day off, he would have said fine.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I tried to hide it, and whatever. And he didn't like that kind of thing.
Yep.
So yeah. And Charles said, that day when that happened, Charlie goes, look, maybe we can work out a deal when you're on the road for a different pay scale. Because you're gone for 4 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. It's 24 hours a day. It could be a different pay scale, and they were willing to work with me, but it just I decided to go to the band instead. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how it ended.
How long were you at West Point?
6 years.
Yeah, was that your only duty station while you were in?
Yeah, that's called a premier band. So when you get there, it's that band, the First Army Band, and the Army Field Band.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get there, you don't get in trouble. Everything is fine. You
Mm-hmm.
can stay there for a whole career. Permanent duty station.
So, is it like it is these
I chose
days?
to get out. Yeah.
Like it is these days when you went in, it was at automatic E4 or E5?
That band was we called that an E5 band.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to boot camp, you're an E3, and then
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you get to the band, you're a 5.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to wait for somebody to die to move up. The way that was, we had 96 people, and we had our own rank structure. So we had so many E9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, and 5s.
Wow.
And if somebody got out, it was just a certain number. So it took
Right.
somebody to do something before you could move up, pretty much.
Right.
Or the commander he could accelerate somebody if he really wanted to keep somebody. And he
Mm-hmm.
did that. We had a jazz band lead player that he promoted every time he could, as soon as they were as soon as they qualified for that rank.
Mm-hmm.
He was the youngest sergeant major in the U.S. Army. Eric Parks. He was a hell of a
Wow.
player.
Wow.
So yeah, it was an E5 band. I think down in D.C. they might be a E6
Mm-hmm.
type band.
Did you enjoy your time in the service?
I did. Yeah, yeah. We did a lot of good jobs.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of time off too. I got into water skiing up there in the Hudson River, and things like that. Um, I met my wife there as well, so I did like it. I just didn't know if I wanted to work 20 more years for the government.
Mm.
And I'll tell you, Larry, when I saw the ad for the West Point band, and of course, I was with Empire, I called down there to the band, and whoever answered the phone, it turned out to be somebody in the band. They asked me what I was doing currently, and I told them I was with Empire, and they're like, "You're going to be bored out of your mind when you get here." Guess what? They were, for the most part, they were right. You think about where I was and all that action every day, and then we come down there, and there were weeks when we didn't even work in the band. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they worked, a ton, but we didn't travel, so
Mm-hmm.
it's mostly on post playing, just a few concerts out, here and there,
Did you ever stay in touch with any of the guys in the group?
all the time. Still do. I called Rolf frequently. We emailed a lot. I would go out and catch them on concerts when they played anywhere within 100 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Dave Ohanian I've called many times. Dave stopped here at my place to stay overnight um, on his way up from Florida. He used to live in Florida. I
Mm-hmm.
called Charlie Lewis once or twice a year. Sam's gone now. I saw Sam at Westchester State, my old college. He was playing with the
Mm-hmm.
Boston Brass
Mm-hmm.
before he passed away. And my one boy was at a band camp up there in high school, and we were supposed to pick him up and go to Saratoga in the afternoon when it was over.
Mm-hmm.
We go to Saratoga every summer, and he called me and he said, Boston Brass is here tonight, and Palafian is a tuba player. I'm like, okay, we'll get up there and we'll just go to the concert, and then we'll go to Saratoga. And he met Sam, and that was hilarious. I was showing my wife, and I was showing my boy Austin. I don't know if my other boy was there. I showed him the School of Music. Right across the street was the stage entrance to this hall. So we
Mm-hmm.
pull up. I'm like, yeah, this is where I went to college. This is the School of Music. Over here's the stage door. A car pulls up, and Sam gets out. I'm like, hey man, small world. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that was the last time I saw Sam play.
Andrew Hitz, he's the host of the Brass Junkies. I don't know if you've listened to that show. It's a
Is he a tuba player?
He is, and with he used to be with
I think
Boston.
I played with. I think I played with him at Tanglewood in this Empire seminar.
Well, and that's
I've seen his name and his pictures. I'm pretty sure it's the same guy.
I'm
So
sure it
anyway,
is. Yeah, but of course, he tells about his first time encountering Sam. It's a great story that he's told. I've heard a number of times, but um, uh, I think they did a couple of interviews with Sam, which were just terrific.
I think I heard one of those.
And the last one, of course, Sam knew he was sick. Uh, And boy, that interview had me in tears. And I think I just saw that it's been 3 years. He's been gone 3 years at this point, which is really hard to believe. Um, and
Yeah,
but Rolf has been gone 6 or
I
more
think
years.
2016 passed.
Yeah,
I do believe.
yeah.
I have a good friend in Boston who he and I were at BU together, and he stayed in touch with Rolf a little more than I did. And he called me up and said, "Boy, I was talking to Rolf, man. It's not good, you know."
Hmm.
And things went downhill.
Hmm.
I think the last time I saw him play a concert, I was shocked. Just
By how he
he
looked or how he
wasn't there.
sounded.
The way he played, I've heard him play. I don't know, 200-300 concerts,
Hmm.
and uh, just uh, just killing it all those years. And then it was falling apart, and maybe that was part of why he passed. I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was a
Well,
shame. I went backstage to see him, and he goes, I've been sick lately, and I've heard him say that over the years at different times as maybe an excuse, but I knew that wasn't the case. You
yeah.
know, it was a shame.
We were talking before we went live that you had talked to Mark Reese, or well, we're talking about Mark, but you had mentioned
Yes,
having heard Mark kind of pick up the slack on uh, on some shows where Rolf maybe wasn't at
that's what it seemed to
100%.
me. Yeah, and just briefly, um, watching them during a concert, and seems like they get to the end of a certain tune, and Rolf was just out of gas, and Mark would just jump in and cover him the last three bars, just stuff like
Hmm.
that. I could be wrong about that, but I could see Rolf was not in top shape the last couple of times I saw him.
Hmm.
You know, but I always tried to catch him anytime I could. It's just great to
Yeah.
run into him. We even talked about me coming back to work for him at a certain point after I moved here, and then we all thought better of it. But yeah, hardly a day goes by I
I.
don't think about those guys. I mean, he had a lot of effect on me on business, and I've
Hmm.
been building custom homes for 30 years now, and stuff happens, and sometimes trying to figure out how to fix it, and I think of him, how he could get results out of people.
Hmm.
And it's just,
Hmm.
he was really remarkable, and he was a small guy. I think he wasn't any taller than I was. I'm a pretty small guy, but he could be very imposing. So
I remember I was fortunate I got to see him live once here. They came and played with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and
mm-hmm.
it was balcony seating, and I remember I was thinking, I'm not going to have very good vantage point for this, but they started the show with Bolero, and Ralph walked out in the balcony, like four
Oh,
or five rows right in front of me, and it was like, okay, all of a sudden the best seat in the house. And I don't remember
yeah.
who was with the group at that point. This is late '80s, early '90s, but holy cow, what a show!
Yeah.
It was
It's really
spectacular.
something. Night
Yeah,
after night after night.
yeah,
It's just mind blowing. The musicianship of that group is just incredible. It's all
yeah,
sound oriented.
yeah.
I was talking about Charlie Lewis and how he coaches, and he would take a group in a college. We go to colleges all the time and do, um, you know, clinics. And they'd have a student brassman take it up there, and Dave would coach them, and Sam and Rolf and Larry and whatnot. But but Charlie could take a quintet that seemed to have a lot of problems. In 15 to 20 minutes, he'd really have them blowing, and he'd always just talk about this sound. You know,
Hmm.
it's just all about the sound, and they had a way of developing it that was just fantastic.
Hmm.
And when you saw them live, it wasn't any different. It's not like they're doing it on the recordings, but not live. I mean, it's every night. You know,
Yeah, but that's why those recordings are so good, right? Because they work those tunes over and over and over again.
yeah, yeah.
Although I think I mentioned that to Jeff Kerno once. He goes, no, there was or maybe it was Scott Hartman telling me this. He goes, no, we actually recorded that before we went on tour. I can't. It might have been.
Oh, I
I
remember
forget.
him saying that. I
Yeah.
can't speak on the recordings because they only did one recording. I think the whole time I was up there, um, and it never came out. It was never pressed,
Hmm.
which was a shame. That was a They were playing this Bach trio sonata. It was just fantastic. Played it for a
Mm-hmm.
whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I got a couple pictures, Larry. That's Charles Lewis and Sam Flapian,
Yeah.
1981. So
I can't make
if you
out
can
Sam's
see
face, but I can see the hair.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
This guy's.
So
Uh,
Charlie Lewis, um, he's still around, right?
yes, he teaches at Berkeley. He's been at Berkeley
Well,
a long time.
I've got to get in touch with him.
Yeah, you should. I
Absolutely,
call him.
absolutely.
I haven't called him in a little while, but um, boy, he's done it all. He was
Mm-hmm.
in the Duke
Mm-hmm.
Ellington band briefly, but
Mm-hmm.
he always said, I'm a symphonic guy. I love classical music. He really didn't
Mm-hmm.
like going on the road with with them, but yeah, he's had a fabulous career. He's taught at New
Mm-hmm.
England, Berkeley, and BU
Mm-hmm.
all these years. Um, yeah, fantastic. He
Yeah.
really Nobody helped me more. It's just in a short amount of time. You know,
Yeah.
just really
Uh,
understands how to blow.
but let's shift gears here for a second. I don't want to forget. Uh, Going back to the drum corps thing, you still have a connection to
Mm-hmm.
some of these corps because you had asked me, about, or you told me that you were going to come out here for DCI in August. What
Right.
is still your connection with DCI?
Well, I don't have a connection with them other than just going to the shows. But in the senior circuit, and real quickly for those that don't know, senior drum corps over most of the years has been ages 16 on up, no upper limit. The junior
Mm-hmm.
drum corps age generally was 14 to 21. Once you're 22, you can't march in, like Star of Indiana. Um, now, what the seniors have done, once you get too old to go out there and do all this, which is only so long you can march around and do
Mm-hmm.
these shows all summer long. It just
Mm-hmm.
about ruins your family life and everything else. We have what we call alumni corps. So I play in a senior alumni corps that does maybe 15 jobs a year. We've got probably 50 horn players, probably 25 drummers,
Mm-hmm.
color guard, and we just it's parades and standstill concerts.
Mm-hmm.
We don't march. We don't do any marching on the field. That stuff's over. But you could do this with a beer in your hand. But the level of our group has come up quite a bit, and So we have shows with other alumni corps, and that's what we do.
So that I'm glad you said that because I think I had mentioned Star United being a senior corps, but I think that's right. They're an alumni corps.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but the level
There's
of
still
playing
some around.
is yeah, the level of playing is terrific in that, and of course, those friendships made in drum
It's
corps.
all amateurs, but it can be at times it's quite good.
Yeah,
And if you like it, that's all that matters.
yeah.
You know, they play in the G horns, but I play on my box C trumpet, and they don't really know that. If you can believe that, but probably probably 6 or 8 guys realize I'm playing on the C trumpet up there. But you can't go out with a B flat Bach because it looks very conspicuous. But the C trumpet is shaped almost like the G horn is, and
hmm
that's what I play on with that group. You know, just the way
I was
better instrument.
such I was such a geek in high school for drum corps that I bought my own Deg G soprano. I paid
Wow.
$200 for this,
is
and actually got to march with it my
that
first year as star.
is
And
that
then I
three
and
valve
that
or two valve?
two. This is early
Two valve.
'80s,
Okay. Yeah.
and and ended up playing the King. Star had all King uh,
Huh.
bugles back then, but um, yeah, I've. Well, I don't know if I should say that out loud. I know where my King soprano is. Um, that's
Yeah.
all I need to say
Good.
about that. I know where that horn is.
That's funny.
Yeah. Um,
That's good.
well, man, this has been fun. You know, it's a viewpoint, a vantage point you don't often get with a
Oh, I'm
group.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot of mystique with that group.
yeah,
People always want to know. You
yeah.
know, I was
Well,
lucky in that regard because things went pretty well, and I got to play with them. They added extra players for the American Brass Band Journal, and I was able to play concert with them.
hang on 1 second.
Yes.
I just got an alert that my computer's about to die. I forgot to plug it in. I'm plugging it in. Okay, there we go. Oof, that was close. All right, I'm sorry. You were saying.
I was just saying that I was fortunate enough to play a concert with them on the American Brass Band Journal book, which they doubled the parts.
Uh huh.
Then I sat with Charlie and played second trumpet, and not for the whole concert, but a feature in the middle of it. So that was a pretty hair-raising experience. So
Well, okay. So now begs the
that,
question: when you were preparing for this West Point audition, did you ever ask, or did Rolf ever offer some coaching?
no, I never studied with him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I took any lessons leading up to that, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you had
That is hard to
plenty
believe,
just
isn't it?
being around there, right?
I did, yeah. And I used to practice around him. There were times when I was in shape when we were in town, and he'd come in and I'm playing because we practiced in the same room.
Mm.
So, my bedroom was on the other side of a door, and all the quintet stuff was right here in this room. 5 chairs and stands, all the music library, T-shirts, records, tapes,
Yeah.
all this junk, and it just piled in there. And then you open up a door, and it's my bedroom and a bathroom. No kitchen.
Wow.
Every meal was eaten out
Yeah.
because we used the kitchen stuff to put use all the shelves to put all the music and all this stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
But he'd come down there, 5 o'clock and practice when we were in town, and I was up at the office all day. I'd come back and come in, and I'm laying in bed or watching TV, and here he comes. He's going to practice for 2 hours. If they weren't playing concerts, he was practicing. I heard him play every single day.
Mm-hmm.
He was an incredible player, of
Mm-hmm.
course. So, but no, they didn't coach me for that at all. But things worked out for me
Yeah.
on that. So
Yeah.
I had
Well,
an idea that might work out for me. So
well, it sounds like you've had, and not that I'm implying it's over. But it sounds like you've had a pretty good career.
short.
Yeah.
A couple of years with them, I've done 3 things. I played in the West Point band. I've built about 75 homes in my career. I'm getting ready to retire right now, actually. And I work for Empire Brass, so
Hmm. Hmm.
kind of crazy.
Well, I don't say this lightly. I think some people think it's cliche, but I will say thank you for your service. I do appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah.
And
I really enjoy playing in the band up there. Yes.
um, well, listen, this has been fun. And I want to respect your time, but
Sure.
thank you for sharing everything. And I'm really thrilled that you reached out. All those months back, and we made that
Yes.
connection. Um,
Yes. I
so
appreciate it.
this has been fun. And yeah, absolutely. And of course, if you come through Indy, you know how to get a hold of me.
Yes.
Um, and I know, barring any other pandemic, I think DTI is going to be here this August again.
Yeah.
So
They
uh,
had a cut down season last year,
yeah,
and I went to a few shows. So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
we'll have
I'm looking
to meet
forward
up
to it.
certainly when you get in town. Yeah. So
Maybe we'll
well,
sit down a
hang
couple
on
of
just
shows
a
together.
second.
We go for 3 days. Sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, that sounds great. I tell you what, hang on just a second. I'm gonna sign off here, and but don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
Um, all right. So I will just say this. Thanks to Chuck here. While we've got him, I appreciate everything you shared with us tonight, and just a quick thank you again to sponsors: Messina Covers, Chop Saver, Austin Custom Brass, Eastman Winds, Pickett Blackburn, SE Shires. I can't believe it. I think I got everybody. I hope I got everybody in there. Um, and of course, I'm trying to think who's coming up next. The next live interview is Tony DiLorenzo, and that's coming up in May. And just pay attention to social media for that one. So, again, thanks for joining me tonight, and we'll see you next time.